Welcome back to another section of the Book of Ecclesiastes here at Grace Anglican Church, and mostly online anyway. We're going through the Book of Ecclesiastes, and we are now in the bulk of Chapter 5. Chapter 5, verses 8 through 20 are dealing largely with various topics of poverty and of wealth, and how we relate to money, how we relate to possessions, wealth, and our use of these things. So rather than reading the whole section in one go and then offering comments, I'm going to read it in sections because it's sort of more episodic, more topical as it goes through these questions. So we have three little sections, little groups of verses that deal with slightly different takes on the issue of power, wealth, poverty, and the relationships that we have with these things. So we begin in verses 8 and 9 of chapter 5, where we hear, "If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is gain for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields." Here, hearkening back to the beginning of chapter 4, we have another word about the injustice of oppression. Here, oppression is implied to be a vanity, because whatever gain the oppressor might get, he is watched by a higher one over him. So the implication is that justice will come, and therefore it is better that a king should care about cultivated fields. That is, the governors should invest in the good of the governed. So while this topic of the oppression of the poor is a common topic in the scriptures, especially in the writings of the Old Testament, it is treated here with a concern and a realization that even if this evil occurs, there is this knowledge and faith that however bad an oppressor might be, there's always someone more powerful than he or she. And that, of course, is going to be ultimately God, who will be just. And we know, especially even from just the law, the Old Testament, the law of Moses, that God is a king committed to cultivated fields. He does care about the people and their welfare, and the poor in particular, and you know, the helpless, the needy, the stranger, those who are most in need. And it is good that a king or any sort of governor or leader should care about the very same. And this works on every scale. This works not just on a national scale, but in an organization. You know, leaders should care about members and prospective members. Parents should care about children, and so on and so forth. The second section is verses 10 through 12. This is more about money. "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep." Once again, greed and the love of wealth are vanities. They are never, people who love wealth, people who are caught up in greed, are never satisfied. And these verses also call out the glutton of all things. They increase who eat them, he says, which is sort of almost a funny sort of way of hearing it, because we have, when goods increase, the food in this case, they increase who eat them. So it's calling out those who consume, and this is not necessarily only about food, but because if you fill your head with cares and interests, then you're big-headed, and that's also not a good thing. But whether it's gluttony of the stomach or gluttony of any other pleasure, it is a vanity. What advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? The full stomach of the rich, he also goes on to say, will not let him sleep. this is an important set of verses for us to hear, because we live in a very gluttonous culture, not just about food, the fast food and all the candy and all the unhealthy things that we consume and just the portion sizes. We, especially in America, we eat so much. But we're not just gluttonous about food. Our culture in the West, and probably most of the world right now, is very gluttonous for all sorts of things. Gluttonous for leisure and for pleasure, for television, movies, and games, and all the other things that we invest our time in. We are both big on consuming and choosy in our consuming, because we have the luxury of picking and choosing how to satiate ourselves. But we also live in an increasingly anxious and emotionally unbalanced culture. The mental health issues are on the rise, anxiety, depression, and so forth. And really, these two things we should understand to be very connected, as Koheleth observes here. Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, but whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. So having this gluttonous culture is hand in hand with this emotionally unbalanced culture. These dainties or these excesses are vain hopes for satisfaction. So there's the issue, or an issue with money and the love of wealth and greed. The third section that we have here is also about wealth from another angle, verses 13 through 17, which says, "There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again. Naked as he came, he shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and anger." So these verses give us the example of someone who has become rich and then lost that wealth. This could be because of mismanagement or misfortune. It doesn't really say what kind of bad venture befell this person. And it doesn't matter either way. The point is that he becomes rich, he loses that wealth, and dies a pauper. This also highlights the vanity of wealth, as we see how gains can be lost within one's own lifetime, and a man dies in the same condition in which he was born. This is a grievous evil, says Koheleth, our preacher, the author here. This is a grievous evil, meaning nothing good comes of a wealth-oriented life. In such a lifestyle, there is only vexation and sickness and anger, as he says at the end here. This is building easily upon what we just read previously about the lack of satisfaction to be found in money, and the inability to sleep, the lack of satisfaction that comes with being full and pursuing more. It's similar here with this love of wealth concept, in that there is only vexation, sickness, and anger when you live a life chasing after wealth. These are confused priorities, and not only do these fail to bring satisfaction, but they actually make our lives worse. Chasing after wealth, chasing after riches, chasing after money or anything else that we can try to possess, and lamenting its loss is a vanity. It's a futile or meaningless way of life, and it is not good for us. That's not how we were made to be. So how were we made to be? What is the solution to this collection of issues regarding wealth? Well, this is how he closes the chapter, verses 18 through 20. "Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them, and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. This first verse, 18 here, begins with the lesson that we've heard a couple times already in this book. Find enjoyment in what God has given you. This is your lot. It is good to, and fitting, or proper and right, to eat and drink. Find enjoyment in what God has given you, the few days of your life. So it's just a sort of stoic, almost, reception of the good that we have in this life, whether it's a lot or a little. Verse 19 in the middle here has a lot packed into it, though. It seems pretty straightforward. Everyone to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and to rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. It's just filling out the thought that we have in verse 18, and we've seen this philosophy of sorts before in the Book of Ecclesiastes. But there is something really clever here, which is easy to miss. Having wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them are two very different things. There are people so caught up in protecting their wealth that they don't have time to appreciate and enjoy their wealth. Similarly, there are those who are so caught up on the need. I've got to save money, got to save for retirement, got to save for the kids' college, got to save, that they don't know how to enjoy what they have. And this miserable miserliness comes both with the rich and the poor and everyone in between. Again, it is better to accept our lot, rejoice in our toil, and recognize these as gifts from God. Whether you have a lot or little, if you are worried about the money and obsessed about its preservation or its increase, you are living a life of anxiety and a life that is not thankful, not grateful, not recognizing the goodness of what God has given you. So that's how this ends in verse 20. He will not remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. This life of cultivated joy will forget the hardships and the pain of this life. Maybe not completely, maybe not perfectly, and perhaps you don't need or want to forget everything that's bad, of course. But the point is that this is a life of cultivated joy, of gratitude, of thanksgiving toward God. This is how we are called to live. You will find greater happiness, greater meaning in this life when you cultivate a way of life that is thankful and full of gratitude. When we acknowledge that God has given us what we have and we enjoy it in his name and we use it rightly with an eye toward others, especially if we have power or wealth or both, to share that or use that for the benefit of those who are less wealthy or less powerful, just to connect this back to how this section started about oppression and whatnot, then we are living a life that does have more meaning, that does have more grounding in one that is faithful to God. If wealth is for its own sake, that is a vanity, havel, a breath of vapor. It's there and it's gone. You might lose it, or it might go to your children and they might lose it. But in any case, a life for wealth, a life of greed, a life of gluttony is a vanity. It is futile, it is meaningless. And if you instead accept what you have and give thanks to God for giving it to you in the first place, then you will find a life of greater meaning and a greater happiness. And perhaps, maybe, just maybe, in eternal life, there will be treasures that you have found, that you have stored up in the course of that generosity and thankfulness.